Good morning. Welcome to the Tuesday Bible study. As always, we are glad to be able to connect with you on YouTube. Thank you for continuing to be with us in this way. Today, in keeping with our theme of O Me of Little Faith in Lent, we'll be looking at John 12, 20 to 33.
And it is, I think, important to note that this is our final Sunday in Lent as we prepare for Palm Sunday and Holy Week and move in that direction.
How quickly it's come.
How quickly it's come, absolutely. John 12. Now among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Then Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honor. Now my soul is troubled, and what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd standing there heard it and said that it was thunder. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, not for mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to indicate the kind of death he was to die.
Thank you, Bonnie. So we have kind of a long, drawn-out sermonette, if you will. We have Greeks who came to simply wanted to meet Jesus, and Philip and Andrew tell him that, and then he kind of breaks into this long, foreboding sermon about what is to come and possibly what his death will mean. And as in typical gospel fashion, it's a bit ambiguous. And so I think we ought to dive in and see what do we make of this, again, this mission of Jesus, God sent to earth to die at the hands of humanity. And I say all that because I think this text, again, opens up to us who Jesus is, his relationship to the Father, and I think it makes us ask, how is it that God in Jesus, how could God be God and die at the hands, be abused and die at the hands of humanity?
Well, I think you make a very good point, too, especially for the gospel writer, John. Because this gospel is written specifically answering the question through the whole of the gospel. Who is Jesus? It doesn't start with a birth narrative. It doesn't start with... and so John, from the very beginning, drives his gospel by that question. Who is Jesus? And so I think there is a hint of it here, who Jesus is. The very fact that Greeks are coming, supposedly non-Jewish people, Gentile people, are coming to see Jesus. And that then in John is opening Jesus' ministry up to everyone, as he says later.
In 32.
Exactly. Will draw people to myself. So he doesn't say, I will draw the Israelites, the Jewish people to myself. I will draw people to myself. And so that sort of happens as we begin this text. This is a pivotal text, as I said earlier, being the last Sunday in Lent, moving into Palm Sunday. The pivotal text is that it moves from Jesus' mission and ministry and moves more into the death and resurrection, moving that forward now.
Yeah.
And it talks about being glorified.
Yeah.
And so moving it in that direction.
Most of the commentaries that I've read about this text do focus on the kind of the meaning of how can God be God and still die at the hands of humanity. And I think in keeping with our Lenten theme, O me of little faith, it prompts me to ask, who is God and how is God still God if the purpose of Jesus is to suffer and die at the hands of humanity? And then it also makes me think, well, what is that meant to teach us about God? And so I'll ask that to you, but I'll also give you a moment to think about it. I think that God's power is found in suffering, and his strength is found in human weakness, and that God's vulnerability shows us how God does care for the oppressed and the abused and the downtrodden. And I think so, again, we have this upside down version of what the Messiah was expected to look like. But it continues, even though we've talked about it over and over again, it continues to confound me how God can be God by dying. By letting the world win, if you will, by letting the systems of the world seemingly win. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But so I'm left with, what is this meant to teach me about God? If Jesus' purpose is to die, and that somehow means that will bear fruit, how do I connect the dots and get the clearest image of who God is?
I think a piece of this is that we have to remember this is about Jesus' humanity. Now, this is where I think mystery still comes into play, because we say Jesus is fully human and fully divine. Right. And that, I will be honest, is hard to wrap your head around. But if we look at Jesus in his humanity, he did all kinds of things that God wouldn't have to do. The divine side of Jesus wouldn't have to do. Like, he was baptized. The divine side of Jesus didn't have to be baptized. We are baptized into the family of God. Well, Jesus is already there. We're baptized for forgiveness of our sins. Jesus didn't sin. But a big piece, I think, of why Jesus was baptized, because in our humanity, we needed to see that God became one of us. And so Jesus did a lot of these kinds of things. Right. And the important thing, too, is, along that same line, that God is God, I think an important piece here is in verse 23, Jesus answered them, the hour has come. And if we do a study in John, there are many occasions where Jesus says, my hour has not come, my time has not come. So it is the sense of, at this point, Jesus' time has come that God would be glorified. Right? Now, that doesn't make sense to us. How is God glorified through death?
Hanging on
Absolutely.
the cross. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, again, though, I think in that upside down way of seeing who God is, I'm glad that God didn't come as a powerful dictator. I'm glad that God didn't come with vengeance and vindictiveness, but came as a lowly servant, born into poverty, a life of very humble beginnings, and promoted a way of peace and not violence. It's a way of carrying out the mission of God. And
well, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you said it, and really, it is on Good Friday, the world won. Satan won on Good Friday. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And there's I think, if to personify Satan, there's dancing around and, excitement because Satan, this, whatever you believe Satan to be, believes that he's won over, I say he, she, whatever, it has won over God. That's huge, because for them, again, still, that their gods were the ones who fought for them. So if God suddenly loses to the world,
what does that mean?
What does that mean? Absolutely.
And I bet the disciples felt that way that day.
Absolutely.
From everything we've been told in the Gospels, they felt abandoned.
Absolutely.
As deeply distraught and disillusioned as you can be.
Right.
Their Messiah had not only been beaten and mocked and convicted, but crucified and didn't come down off the cross.
Exactly.
Died.
Exactly. And so in our women's Bible study, one of the things that is talked about is the entirety of the Bible is about God's redemption of God's people. That's what it's about. Yeah. Now, we want to throw away the Old Testament, but here's the thing. The disciples, and certainly the other people around Jesus when he died, would have the Old Testament memory. That's they study it. They knew it. And so, absolutely on that day, would have doubted God, because for all intents and purposes, Satan won. Yeah. Another God, so to speak, won. How can that be?
Yeah.
And so their doubt, here again, I can only imagine what it was like for them all day Saturday. Yeah. Sitting in that doubt, sitting in the belief that
they hid.
God lost. Yeah,
they hid
God
out
lost.
In fear.
Exactly.
And didn't know what was next.
And in humanity, even though Jesus said to them several times, I will be raised again in 3 days, they didn't understand that.
Yeah. So let's look at verse 31, if we can, Bonnie. Now is the judgment of this world. That stuck out to me, because I think we all get a little bit intimidated. I know I do when Jesus speaks of judgment, or when God speaks of judgment. I think, uh-oh. But, if we view the world not simply as people, if we view the world as a fallen realm, or a system of institutions and structures and powers that oppose God, that oppose God and seek to oppress humanity, then judgment all of a sudden becomes palatable, I think, and even welcome. Because what we want, I think, we want a God who comes to judge and dismantle those powers that oppose God. Racism, domination, sexism, greed, consumption, violence, hatred, and on down the line. All these things that have held people captive and have made us believe that is the way of the world, that to dominate you have to use violence and power. Yeah. To win, you have to defeat. Right. And here Jesus in death exposes the world, I think, for what it is. Yes. A system so entrapped in all these isms that we talk about. And the only way, we need that judgment. We need a death, or we need something to break down those systems that ensnare all of humanity. Right. And so, again, now is the judgment of the world. Well, thank God. Yes.
And also is the judgment of this world. Now, the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I think we have to understand what that means. It's not about the global world, really, that we're talking about. But we're talking about much the same as when Peter confronted Jesus. I'm going to go back to that. And Jesus is predicting his death, and Peter says, not on my watch. Never will you do that. We remember Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. you have your mind on things of this world, not on heavenly things.
Right.
So that indication is that it is the selfishness. The world pulls us into a selfishness,
Yeah.
into a sinful nature,
Mhm.
so to speak. And our faith, hopefully, pulls us out of that to think about heavenly things.
Mhm.
So absolutely, it is the judgment of this world,
Yeah.
and that the ruler of this world will be driven out, hopefully to have us focus on the bigger picture.
Yeah, and wasn't it when Jesus was arrested, was it Peter who pulled out a sword and cut off the ear
Yes.
of a Roman
Yes.
official? And Jesus, again, tells Peter, no,
Yeah.
put away that sword. That's not the way of God.
Right. Right.
Even his own disciples fell into that false thinking that to win, to dominate,
Yeah.
to be victorious, we have to use violence. We have to play that game that the world plays. And Jesus was not about that.
Yeah. It's interesting, as I said, the Old Testament is important
Yeah.
as well. So when we look at this, and you just mentioned the, cutting the ear off, the violence there,
Yeah.
it seems contradictory.
Uh-huh.
It almost seems as if the God of the Old Testament is very violent, and that suddenly the God of the New Testament doesn't...
Is anti-violence.
Right, is anti-violence. And really, it's putting it into context. You can't just generalize and say the God of the Old Testament is a violent God, the God of the New Testament is a grace-filled God. It's context. And so the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament, there is a piece of violence in this too. Because what did Jesus do when there were money changers in the temple? He overturned the tables of the money changers, and he drove them out. So there is, in a sense, in the New Testament, this idea of righteous anger, and that righteous anger is okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's different than in the Old Testament, as God was trying to form them into a people.
Right.
And to do that, he had to take all other gods away from them. And so God is fighting for his people in the Old Testament, really. He's fighting for the redemption of God's people, but they keep going astray and worshiping other gods of other nations. And
we could talk about Numbers 21
Oh,
like we did
absolutely.
on Sunday, and to find life, the Israelites had to suffer at the hands of poisonous serpents.
Yes.
And the only way that they would find life was to look at that symbol of death lifted up on a pole. And obviously we know how that connects to Jesus being lifted up on a pole. And by not turning away, by looking at
Right.
that death, by accepting a new system.
Yes.
Not of the
Yes.
world, not of violence, not of dominance, not
Yes.
of power, and to look at death as a way to life is still revolutionary.
Right. Once again, you cannot get to the resurrection
Mhm.
unless you go through the cross.
Yeah,
And that, I think, is extremely important.
yeah. And I think we'll end on that. So thank you for being with us as always and diving deeper into John 12. We welcome any feedback that you might have, any thoughts, any questions. We thank you again for connecting with us today. We hope that you will connect with us again tomorrow evening at 6:30 for week 4 of O Me of Little Faith, When in Doubt, our midweek Lenten worship. Thank you again. Have a good week.